The healing of light. As the incantation was recited, a soft white light shot out, landing precisely on the sickbed. The white light emitted the scent of early spring, as if to take one into the ocean of life. One's body never lies. The bizarre scene forced Li Mu to swallow the words that were on the tip of his tongue. The scene before him didn't seem like a movie shoot. A prank, even less likely. As an ordinary salaried worker, Li Mu didn't believe anyone would go to such lengths for him. I have crossed over. Just as this thought emerged, a surge of unfamiliar memories sprang from his mind. Without time to struggle, Li Mu elegantly passed out. Father Quinn, how is Hudson's condition? A lavishly dressed middle-aged man asked with concern. Next to him was a noblewoman with red swollen eyes, waiting for the answer with a complex expression. There was both expectation and resentment, but she hid it well, appearing just like a mother concerned for her son. Don't worry, Baron Redman. God will bless his believers. The backlash has been successfully removed, and young Master Hudson has awakened his life seed. He just consumed too much energy and passed out temporarily. Father Quinn said, looking somewhat weary. Obviously, the healing spell he just cast was not easy for him. Who could blame him? He was just a junior priest. However, any priest is a high-level talent, at least in Irontown. The only priest and pharmacist in the territory, Father Quinn was quite respected. He usually treats people with his own concoctions, conducting experiments on the side. Only the most important people in the territory deserved his divine magic. May the great Lord of Dawn bless Hudson. Thank you, Father Quinn, Baron Redman said, a little excited, his worried expression instantly disappearing. If it weren't for his noble upbringing, his reaction might have been even more exaggerated. After sending off the priest, Baron Redman turned to the maid and commanded, take good care of Hudson, notify me immediately when he wakes up. Perhaps seeing Baron Redman's improved mood, the noblewoman couldn't help but plead, Redman, now that Hudson is all right, can we let poor Lysol down first? It was as if a sore spot had been poked. The previously cheerful Baron Redman's face instantly clouded over. Shut up. You spoiled him. He stole his brother's life essence. If word gets out, my Koslow family's 1,000-year reputation will be ruined by this beast. If it wasn't for Hudson's good fortune, I would have killed this beast. Let him hang there, whoever dares to let him down. Tears are a woman's most potent weapon. If it was any other time, Baron Redman would have likely backed down already. But now, everything was different. After saying his piece, Baron Redman turned and left, not giving the Baroness any face. On the sickbed, Li Mu, who had merged with the original host's memories and slowly woke up, finally confirmed that he was not dreaming. That he didn't know if he had saved the universe in his previous life, but he had hit the jackpot by crossing over. If possible, Li Mu would rather go back and continue his 996 work schedule. Let whoever wants to cross over do it. Hudson Koslow, the third son of Baron Redman, was Li Mu's new identity. Frankly, although this birth wasn't of extreme wealth, it was something he couldn't have achieved in his previous life. If he used this as a starting point and worked hard, he wouldn't have to worry about having a dull life. But the problem was this world was not normal. Although the political structure was somewhat similar to medieval Europe, that was just superficial. Knights, magic, priests, wizards, elves, dwarfs, orcs, sea races, undead, professions and races that only existed in games and novels had now all appeared before him, indicating that this world would not be peaceful. Accustomed to the peace of modern society, suddenly coming to a survival of the fittest world would be difficult for anyone to adapt to. Because he was afraid of pain, Li Mu didn't have the courage to try and end his life. After a night of struggle on the sickbed, he reluctantly accepted the fact that he had become Hudson Koslow. First, set a small goal, survived in a world where religion prevails, mixed with mythology. Any abnormal behavior could lead to disaster. In order not to end up on a barbecue grill, he had to maintain Hudson's identity. Everything else was easy, but mannerisms and habits were not so easy to imitate. At this point, Hudson didn't know whether to thank or resent the cheap younger brother who was still hanging on the pillar. If it weren't for that unfortunate fellow, who had swapped the original host's life essence, he probably wouldn't have had the chance to usurp the nest, and perhaps this crossing would have been avoided. It was also thanks to this accident that he had a perfect excuse. Having experienced a life-threatening shock, a change in behavior could be explained. After sorting out the messy memories in his mind, Hudson had an initial understanding of his situation. The third son of Baron Redman, with 2 older brothers, 1 older sister, 3 younger brothers, and 2 younger sisters. Unfortunately, the current Baroness was his second mother. As it is in all ages, having a stepmother means Hudson's situation wouldn't be good. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the distressing incident of the naughty child swapping the life essence. The only consolation was that the current Baroness was of low birth, the daughter of a merchant. Although wealthy, she didn't have much political weight. In this political union, Baron Redman undoubtedly held the dominant position. The fact that the Hudson brothers were able to grow up safely is the best proof. Thanks to the comprehensive inheritance law, there was no chance of contending for the title. Even if the Baroness had a strong influence, Baron Redman wouldn't depose the elder for the younger. There was no hope for the title, but resources had to be fought for. In this dog-eat-dog world, money can't buy everything. Precious cultivation resources, political resources, all can't be bought with money. In the aristocratic system of dukes, marquises, earls, viscounts, and barons, the baron was already at the bottom, so how much resources could he have? Unfortunately, Baron Redman was very prolific. With so many sons, how could the resources in his hands be enough to divide, especially as the brothers grew older? This conflict was increasingly intensifying. This life essence storm was the result of the conflict. The two older brothers had successfully awakened their life seeds and became knights, serving in the kingdom's army. When it was Hudson's turn, things changed. Life essence, a strategic resource to assist in awakening the life seed, was naturally monopolized by the empire and the church. Even the nobles had a quota, and it wasn't something that could be exchanged for at will. To get the life essence in advance, Baron Redman had to pull in a lot of favors, yet he was still delayed for a year. This delay gave cheap younger brother Lysol, who was not much younger, the chance to awaken his life seed. Cutting in line was impossible. Even if Lysol was Baron Redman's favorite son, even if the Baroness had strong influence, it couldn't outweigh the family rules. Missing this opportunity, who knows how long he would have to wait. Who knows what went wrong, but an unsatisfied Lysol had the absurd idea of stealing the life essence. Looking at the results, it's clear that Lysol's plan ended in tragedy. The life essence was saved, but Hudson was sure that it was destined not to be used by him. In the early morning, the gentle sunlight penetrated the ancient castle, streaming through the window and falling onto the bed. Rubbing his weary eyes, Hudson stretched out in a big yawn. Yes, he decided to take a walk. After 2 days in bed, Hudson felt like he was about to mold. Without a phone, a computer, or any entertainment activities, being confined to the bed was a torment akin to hell. If he didn't fear being exposed and being treated as a devil for a roast, he would not bother feigning illness. Over the past 2 days, important figures in the castle had visited him. With his superior memory, Hudson could ensure he didn't mistake anyone. That was enough. In this class-ridden aristocratic world, handling the upper-level relationships was all that mattered. A large cup of beast milk, a piece of bread, a fruit similar to a tomato, several sauces, butter, and a piece of roast meat made up Hudson's breakfast. Undoubtedly, this kind of luxurious treatment was not something an ordinary baron's son could enjoy every day. He estimated that it was probably due to Priest Quinn's words. Consuming a lot of energy naturally required a good replenishment. As he stepped out of the room, he bumped into the Baroness, who was coming head-on. Clearly, someone had tipped her off. There was no need to delve into this matter. As the mistress of the castle, it was too easy for her to buy a few confidants. "Hudson, you're all right, that's really great. Blessed by the great morning lord, you know, I've been so worried these past few days." Hudson half believed the Baroness's words. She had indeed been very worried these past few days, but not about the original host's health, rather about her own son who was tied to a post. Although he had been in bed for the past 2 days, Hudson was not oblivious to what had happened in the castle. He learned from the maidservant that on the day of the incident, the enraged Baron Redman had given Lashur a severe beating. Even the Baroness, who went to persuade him, was whipped. Maybe he felt it wasn't enough, or maybe he needed to give an explanation to all parties. He also ordered Lashur to be tied to a post. If he hadn't usurped Hudson's place, Lashur might have had to cool down as well. Switching life essence. To put it lightly, it was just a prank. To put it seriously, it was an attempt to murder his elder brother. Awakening the life seed was full of dangers. In ancient times, it was always a 1 in 10 survival rate, until the greatest alchemist of the Aslant continent, Kemboi, invented the life essence. The situation changed. Not only did the success rate increase to half, but even if the awakening failed, one could still save their life. Unlike in ancient times where it was do or die, the birth of life essence greatly increased the success rate of awakening the life seed, and knights blessed by the gods gradually became the mainstream of the continent. Of course, whether it was really blessed by the gods remained to be further verified. At least that's what the history books recorded. But knights who had awakened their life seeds did indeed benefit. Not only did their physical fitness improve, but their affinity with beasts also greatly increased. Almost all knights had their own mounts. The advantage might not be so obvious when fighting alone, but when they appeared on the battlefield in formation, it was a crushing scene. Noble sons mature early, and Lashur was almost 15 years old. He couldn't possibly not know the dangers of awakening without the aid of life essence. A prank certainly couldn't explain it. Respected Lady Tashif, everyone must be responsible for their actions. If you do something wrong, you must pay the price. This is a rule that a noble should abide by. Hudson mocked without hesitation. Frankly, he didn't want to confront the Baroness at this time. But there was no choice. The original host's relationship with the Baroness had always been very bad. Now that this had happened, if he still maintained a pleasant demeanor, it would be hard not to attract attention. "Hudson, don't say that. Lashur is your brother, he's still a child." Before the Baroness could finish her sentence, Hudson pretended to be angry and interrupted. "Yes, he is still a child. But that doesn't affect the rules of the game, unless you think Lashur is not a noble." Mockery, blatant mockery. The origin had always been the Baroness's Achilles heel, preventing her from integrating into the aristocratic circle. Normally, whoever dared to use this as a matter, she would have to turn her face on the spot. But now she couldn't, her precious son was still hanging on the post, which made her unable to be strong. Looking at the Baroness, who was so angry she couldn't speak, Hudson sighed secretly. He hinted so obviously, but she didn't hear the implied meaning. This play was wasted. Indeed, this high-end play is not suitable for everyone. But thinking about it, if the Baroness was so capable, this wouldn't have happened, and their brothers might not have been able to grow up smoothly. Perhaps this is also the reason why she could become the Baroness. Being too smart is clearly not suitable for being a stepmother. After a pause, Hudson helplessly said, "Okay, madam. For your sake, I can let LeSure go this time, but this requires compensation." The sudden change made the Baroness unable to keep up with the rhythm for a moment. Perhaps it was an innate talent. When she heard the word compensation, her expression clearly shook. "What do you want?" As soon as the words came out, the Baroness realized she had misspoke. She was already at a disadvantage, so rushing to offer was clearly not in line with the principle of doing business. Hudson frowned. Discussing the price directly was too vulgar and didn't match his noble demeanor. But thinking about his thin wallet, he lost the breath of being aloof. 500 gold coins. It's not that he didn't want anything else, it's mainly because the real owner of the castle is his father, and the Baroness could not make decisions about anything other than some money. "Why don't you just rob?" Almost instinctively blurted out. It's clear that the number Hudson thought was reasonable far exceeded the Baroness's expectations. "Madam, please respect yourself. According to the common practice in the Continental Wars, the ransom for a noble knight is 500 gold coins. My asking price is completely in line with the rules. Please respect the rules, madam." Hudson said expressionlessly. Once rules are involved in anything, it becomes serious. Matching the price with the ransom of prisoners of war may seem far-fetched, but it's not entirely baseless. Although the Baroness knew that LeSure wouldn't die, as long as Hudson didn't let go, the matter was not over. If she didn't take advantage of the news not being spread to settle the matter, once other members of the Koslow family got involved, it wouldn't be so simple. 300 gold coins, that's the limit I can afford. Hudson, you should know that this is not a small amount, it's almost equivalent to half a year's income of the territory. The Baroness argued earnestly. However, Hudson merely laughed and did not engage in the bargaining. If it were the original owner, he might have been fooled. The income of the territory for half a year sounds terrifying, but in reality, there is a lot of padding in it. If the income were only this much, I'm afraid everyone in the Baron's house would have to eat chaff. You should know that there are very few free people these days, and most of the people in the territory are serfs attached to the nobility. The entire Baron's territory has a population of more than 10,000. Even if Hudson only has a middle school level of mathematics, he knows that his income is not just what is shown on the surface. Concealing income is also an unwritten rule of the noble group. Although the king only collects commercial taxes, the church collects tithe. As a devout believer, one naturally cannot resist the tithe of the church. Therefore, finding ways to reduce income has become the best choice. The per capita annual income of the territory is less than a silver coin, and it is somewhat difficult to eat forage, but they can still pay the tithe on time. Obviously, the Koslow family is the most devout believer of the Lord of Dawn. 300 gold coins, plus a good war horse and a set of armor. Hudson, you have become a knight and need your own knight equipment. The Baroness promised again. Hearing this answer, Hudson rolled his eyes directly. This is clearly fooling him like a child. Becoming a knight does need equipment, but he believes that his cheap father will prepare well. As a traditional nobleman, Baron Redman is very face-saving and will never make a joke in this regard. Although there are many sons and the wallet is a bit thin, isn't Lessel wasted? Not only saved a lot of expenses, but also buffered a few years. It is estimated that it should not be difficult to recover. It's just that the Baroness didn't see the situation clearly and was still working hard for Lessel. In fact, he was abandoned on the day of the incident. Family resources, don't even think about it. Even if Baron Redman loves his son and is willing to continue investing, other members of the Koslow family will not agree. 400 gold coins. Hudson, this is all the cash I can use. If there is more, your father will find out. The Baroness said helplessly. Although she nominally controls the financial power of the house, in fact, Baron Redman is in charge. She can only use her small treasury, and there is really not much cash. The remaining 100 gold coins, just offset it with real objects. Magic cores, crystals are all available, and I don't think the lady will default for this little money. Hudson pretended to be generous. That annoying expression made the anger of the Baroness, who had just suppressed it, rise again. Before she could get angry, Hudson said again, "Madam, go get the money quickly, and please invite the Baron over. I'll go see poor Lessel first. He's been hanging for almost 3 days, and he's still injured. If he delays for a long time, no one knows what will happen." After speaking, he turned around and left without giving the Baroness a chance to speak, as if he had taken her for granted. With a fierce stomp, the Baroness, who was burning with anger, suddenly calmed down. Being able to marry into a noble family as a merchant's daughter and sit firmly in the position of the main mother, her political mind may not be so good, but her skills in house fighting are definitely not bad. Having a conflict now, no matter what the reason, the one who suffers is only herself. Who made her own son pit his mother? If outsiders mistakenly think that the switch of the life essence is instructed by her, then it's over. Divorce is difficult in this continent of Aslanti, but widowhood is very simple. Unlike the noble marriage, the Baroness, who doesn't have a strong mother family, can't stand the toss. Walking in the ancient castle, Hudson slowly walked to the pillar where Lessel was bound until the gold coins were credited. Hanging, it is obviously an exaggerated statement. Although the Baron ordered it, the guards who executed it were not rigid. After all, he is the son of the Baron. If he accidentally receives a meal, the unlucky one is still them. The original, hanging on the pillar, directly became, sitting next to the pillar, and there was a maidservant helping to drive away mosquitoes, and there was a plate of fruit not far away. If it weren't for the rope on Lessel's body connected to the pillar and the disheveled image, it would be hard for people to believe that this was being punished. Seeing Hudson coming over, the two guards who were watching were embarrassed. Instantly. Taking care of one young master, but offending another young master, is clearly not a wise choice. Hudson is not a soft persimmon, and there are two older brothers covering him. The young masters of the Baron's house are divided into two camps, which is not a secret point. One side holds the right of inheritance, and the other side has the support of the main mother in the house. If it weren't for Baron Redman's suppression, it would have been a big deal. Take sides, don't make such a joke, everyone is not a fool. Now you have to look at the face of the main mother, but in the future you have to follow the other side. How to choose? Young Master Hudson, you are here. Nodding, Hudson had no intention of seeking trouble with the guards. In this world of strict hierarchy, the survival of small people is inherently difficult, and it is understandable to be both sides. What's going on? Lessel, my poor little brother, why are you tied up here? Why are you still stunned? Quickly untie the rope and let him down. My poor, if someone who doesn't know the truth sees this scene, they must think that this is a deep brotherhood. In fact, the two who are close in age have been fighting since childhood. Enough, Hudson. You don't need to be hypocritical here. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be punished by my father. Now, get out of here right now. I don't want to see you for a moment. Lessel said almost roaringly. Seeing this scene, Hudson was not annoyed, but showed more affection. Poor Lessel, now he is a little confused, and he doesn't even recognize your dearest brother. Forget it. Let him down first, I'll take the responsibility from my father. Who made me the older brother? I can't watch my little brother suffer. The touching scene made the two guards look dull, and for a moment they forgot what to do. Before they could react, Hudson had already drawn his knight's sword, cut off the rope, and proved that he was serious with practical actions. At this moment, a majestic middle-aged man walked over, and it was Baron Redman, obviously. The scene just now fell into his eyes. He glared at the two guards fiercely, kicked Lessel, who was sitting next to the pillar, and said without any pause, Hudson stays, everyone else takes this beast away. Seeing that everyone hadn't reacted, the Baroness who followed hurriedly added, what are you still stunned for? Quickly take young Master Lessel to heal. Even if it's well covered up, Hudson can feel the heartache of the Baroness. Just now, Baron Redman's kick was not light, and it directly flew 3 or 4 meters. If it weren't for Lessel's good foundation and practice, it would be either dead or seriously injured if it were placed on ordinary people. It can be seen that Baron Redman is truly disappointed. It's not terrible to make mistakes, but what's terrible is to make mistakes without knowing it. In the noble world, stupidity is the greatest original sin. After everyone left, Redman looked at Hudson and said with some relief, you are progressing very quickly, but you performed too much just now. Taking his first step, Hudson stumbled, his pride as a time traveler instantly evaporated. Indeed, the world is full of smart people. Luckily, he discovered this early, otherwise he would have suffered greatly in the future. Perhaps noticing Hudson's silence as a sign of defeat, Baron Redman comforted him, don't be discouraged. At your age, it's already commendable to get this far. In fact, no matter how brilliant the performance is, it can't deceive those who are suspicious. Most of the time, people choose to feign ignorance. Your desire to use this incident to make a name for yourself is not wrong, but stepping on Leeser too hard is over the line. After all, he is your brother. Brotherly conflict is always cruel to any father. Despite Baron Redman's harsh punishment of Leeser, it was only a sign of his disappointment. Deep down, he still cared for his son. After a pause, Hudson asked hesitantly, but father, didn't you say that as a qualified noble, one should always think about maximizing benefits? Leeser, not only is he of poor character, but he is also incredibly stupid. Allowing such a fool into the noble circle will only bring shame to our family. I was just making use of waste. Being merciful to the enemy is being cruel to oneself. Although the hatred belonged to the original host, since he inherited the host's identity, he must also inherit this hatred. Humanitarian destruction is too cruel, and Baron Redman would never agree, so he decided to block Leeser's path in a more natural way. This incident has already affected Leeser's future development, making it difficult for him to even step outside before the storm settles. Taking advantage of this, stepping on him further to boost his own reputation, Leeser's future would be Even more bleak, nobles have their own ways of playing the game. No one likes a person with a bad reputation, especially those like Leaser, who have no noble title. No one would accept him. How can one talk about a future if one can't even enter the circle? Unless Leaser is a cultivation genius, standing at the peak of the continent in one fell swoop. But this is almost impossible. The resources in the mansion are limited, and all the brothers and sisters are watching, wasting his time. Even a genius would become ordinary, let alone him who is not a super genius, perhaps stimulated. Baron Redman stared at Hudson for a long time before slowly saying, "Hudson, your views are too extreme. This is not the mindset you should have at your age. There's nothing wrong with being utilitarian, but you must have a heart that can control utilitarianism and not lose your true self in it. Although there is no right or wrong in the world of nobility, only pros and cons. But there are many smart people in this world. Often smart people are misled by their own cleverness. You should learn to settle down and hide your clumsiness. Alright, you can go now. First, finish reading the books in the library, then reconsider this issue." Baron Redman left with a flick of his sleeve, leaving a confused Hudson alone, not knowing whether to laugh or see RYBY heaven and earth. He said those words just as a disguise. He simply took advantage of the situation to make a little calculation against Leaser. Their relationship was already bad, and after this incident, if he didn't even retaliate, wouldn't it make people suspicious? After all, he was just a 16-year-old boy. Settle down and hide clumsiness, isn't that obvious? If it weren't for fear of causing too much change and attracting the attention of those with ulterior motives, he could have been low-key until the end of time. Ambition is built on the foundation of strength. After living 2 lives, he may not have many advantages, but he has learned to bend and stretch. The golden finger has not yet come into play. He is just an ordinary person with a little more memory. In this world where the strong eat the weak, how dare he show off? If it weren't for the fact that the original host was a school dud who hated reading the most, he would have gone to the library long ago. Baron Redman's order just provided him with a perfect excuse. Walking into the library with the vague memory in his mind, Hudson was quickly disappointed. The mountains of books he had imagined did not appear, only carefully stored scrolls. At one point, Hudson even thought about making paper to get rich, but this unrealistic idea was quickly dismissed, let alone the complex process of paper making, which he, with his half-baked knowledge, simply couldn't handle. The key is that the buttocks determine the head. As a noble, he has to consider issues from the standpoint of the noble class. The birth of paper can lower the cost of knowledge dissemination and promote the spread of cultural knowledge, but is this what the noble class needs? The answer is obviously, no. Scrolls, while expensive to produce and not conducive to cultural knowledge dissemination, are also an advantage. From the standpoint of the noble class, knowledge is naturally best monopolized by themselves. The higher the cost of cultural knowledge dissemination, the more conducive it is to maintain this monopoly system, and the more conducive it is to the rule of the noble class. As a beneficiary, betraying his own class is definitely not something he would do. No matter how important money is, it can't compare to the importance of life. Picking up a volume of continental history, Hudson immediately started reading with interest. Unfortunately, most of the content on it was vague and glossed over, much of it hearsay. There was no other way. The Koslow family, although they have 1,000 years of heritage, are still small nobles. They simply do not have the ability to collect data from the entire continent the family has been able to pass on to the present, and Hudson believes the biggest reason is fertility. Looking at Baron Redman, it's clear that the Koslow family has always had a knack for sowing. Thanks to the family's excellent tradition, apart from the eldest son inheriting the family business, the rest of the sons, upon reaching adulthood, were given a set of knight's equipment and a few servants to venture out and make a name for themselves. The cruel survival mode is the best way to temper people. Although most of the family members fell on the road of struggle, there were still lucky ones who stood out. Either through military merits or through noble marriages, they obtained noble titles. Over generations, there are quite a few small nobles under the banner of the Koslow family, making it one of the most populous families in the empire. Having a large population doesn't necessarily mean having a large power, but it does mean having a strong survival ability. Even if a branch dies out, someone will quickly fill in, and there won't be any tragedies of the empire forcibly reclaiming the territory due to a lack of heirs. By operating in this mode and slowly infiltrating, even without any particularly outstanding figures, the Koslow family will eventually become one of the top families. Of course, the prerequisite is that the birth rate can continue to be so high. Otherwise, in this world where wars often break out, no one knows whether tomorrow or accidents will come first. Perhaps one war would wipe out 1,000 years of accumulation. According to this mode of operation, slowly infiltrating, even without any particularly outstanding figures, the Koslow family will eventually become one of the top families. Of course, the prerequisite is that the birth rate can continue to be so high. Otherwise, in this world where wars often break out, no one knows whether tomorrow or accidents will come first. Maybe one war would wipe out 1,000 years of accumulation. With the vague memory in his mind, Hudson walked into the library, only to be disappointed quickly. The mountains of books he had imagined did not appear. All he saw were carefully stored scrolls. For a moment, Hudson even nurtured the idea of making paper to get rich, but this unrealistic thought was quickly dismissed, not to mention the complex process of paper making, which he, with his half-baked knowledge, simply couldn't handle. The key is that the buttocks determine the head. As a noble, he has to consider issues from the standpoint of the noble class. The birth of paper can lower the cost of knowledge dissemination and promote the spread of cultural knowledge, but is this what the noble class needs? The answer is obviously no. Scrolls, while expensive to produce and not conducive to the spread of cultural knowledge, are also an advantage. From the standpoint of the noble class, knowledge is naturally best monopolized by themselves. The higher the cost of cultural knowledge dissemination, the more conducive it is to maintain this monopoly system, and the more conducive it is to the rule of the noble class. As a beneficiary, betraying his own class is definitely not something he should do. No matter how important money is, it can't compare to the importance of life. Picking up a volume of continental history, Hudson immediately started reading with interest. Unfortunately, most of the content on it was vague and glossed over, much of it hearsay. There was no other way. The Koslow family, although they have 1,000 years of heritage, are still small nobles. They simply do not have the ability to collect data from the entire continent the family has been able to pass on to the present, and Hudson believes the biggest reason is fertility. Looking at Baron Redman, it's clear that the Koslow family has always had a knack for sowing, thanks to the family's excellent tradition. Apart from the eldest son inheriting the family business, the rest of the sons, upon reaching adulthood, were given a set of knight's equipment and a few servants to venture out and make a name for themselves. The cruel survival mode is the best way to temper people. Although most of the family members fell on the road of struggle, there were still lucky ones who stood out. Either through military merits or through noble marriages, they obtained noble titles. Over generations, there are quite a few small nobles under the banner of the Koslow family, making it one of the most populous families in the empire. Having a large population doesn't necessarily mean having a large power, but it does mean having a strong survival ability. Even if a branch dies out, someone will quickly fill in, and there won't be any tragedies of the empire forcibly reclaiming the territory due to a lack of heirs. By operating in this mode and slowly infiltrating, even without any particularly outstanding figures, the Koslow family will eventually become one of the top families. Of course, the prerequisite is that the birth rate can continue to be so high. Otherwise, in this world where wars often break out, no one knows whether tomorrow or accidents will come first. Maybe one war would wipe out 1,000 years of accumulation. Upon his initial understanding of the mainland's history, Hudson was left in awe and his mind was filled with one thought: chaos. Small wars every 3 years, big wars every decade. It seemed as if the world was born for war. Not only did wars frequently erupt between nations, but even within the kingdom, disputes among the nobles were constant. From the moment of birth, war seemed to accompany the life of a noble. The reasons for the outbreak of wars were also bizarrely diverse. A pot of honey, a wild beast, anything could potentially become the fuse for a war. If it weren't for the existence of extraordinary powers, Hudson would doubt if he had returned to the Middle Ages. Aside from the presence of different races, the continent of Aslant was almost a replica of medieval Europe, perhaps due to the cost. Apart from the content related to the Koslow family which was described in detail, the rest was largely glossed over, leaving Hudson very disappointed. The most troublesome part was that all these were past information, completely unrelated to the current situation. To understand the external situation, it seemed he could only ask Baron Redman, but as a Western goods, Hudson was now avoiding him. How could he take the initiative to seek him out? Unable to find the answers he wanted and returning home with a belly full of questions, Hudson suddenly discovered that the magic beast crystal nucleus on his body had turned into powder. Did the Baroness trick me with a fake? As soon as this thought arose, it was dismissed by Hudson. He had personally inspected the goods at the time of delivery, and the strong magic could not be faked. Moreover, with such a short amount of time, there wouldn't be enough time to substitute a fake. Hudson did not believe that the Baroness would have a magician on standby. Focusing his energy, Hudson vaguely discovered that there seemed to be an additional compass in his mind, with a forward inscription faintly visible on it. The golden finger seemed to have arrived, but unfortunately, Hudson's knowledge was limited and he couldn't recognize the 4 ancient Chinese characters on it. Of course, even if he could recognize them, it would be useless. Even the simplest operating procedure could not be described in just 4 words. Unclear about its usage, Hudson was not annoyed. Having it is always better than not having it. The compass was activated after absorbing magic power, which was a starting point. Perhaps if he fed it a few more magic cores, he could find the use of the compass. But thinking of the high price of magic cores, Hudson immediately felt bad. Indeed, he was not destined to be rich. He was in debt in his previous life, and even after crossing over, he was still poor. He had just made a small fortune and now he had to spit it out again. Magic cores are not easy to exchange, you have to go to a big city. The remote Iron Lund town probably only has a collection in the Baron's mansion and Priest Quinn. If Hudson was a magician or an alchemist, there would be hope to find a cheap father to freeload from. As for the knights, forget it, the professions do not match, you can't rush these things. Hudson, who is cautious, will not take risks before understanding the situation. At dawn, as the red glow rose in the sky, the town square was already filled with people. Knights do not exist alone, they must also have auxiliary squires. After all, someone needs to look after the armor, weapons, and horses. The noble knights can't lower their faces to do it themselves. Hudson was no exception. Today was his turn to select a squire, and the many young men in the square were here to try their luck. Although they were only knight squires, they were still out of reach for ordinary subjects. Once they took this step, they were eligible to participate in military training. If they made achievements on the battlefield, they could also receive rewards. The battlefield is indeed dangerous, but the problem is that if you don't become a knight squire, you still have to go to the battlefield. For small and medium nobles who can't afford a standing army, conscripting serfs to participate in the war is commonplace. No matter how you look at it, the survival rate of those close to the leader is always higher than that of the little soldiers. Hudson, select your people in your own way. Baron Redman said expressionlessly. Close cooperation is needed on the battlefield, so the closer the squire, the better. The spirited young men in front of him were naturally familiar to Hudson, and there were no shortage of close people among them. However, those were all the original owners. They had nothing to do with the current Hudson. Based purely on the vague memory in his mind, he couldn't tell who was who. Those who wish to become knight squires, run 10 laps around the town within the time limit of the hourglass. Hudson said with a smile, but that smile seemed extraordinarily terrifying in the eyes of the young men. Looking at the half-empty hourglass, everyone hurriedly started running, fearing they would fall behind. It doesn't matter if you can't beat your enemy, as long as you can outrun your teammates. In Hudson's view, the war of the noble world is also survival of the fittest. In this era where class is severely solidified, skyrocketing is almost impossible. For him, a small noble without inheritance rights, the best option is to endure until the heir in front dies, or until the relatives die out, or find a noble with few descendants to marry. All are much simpler than earning his own territory through military merits. After all, the land now has owners. Unless external forces disrupt it, it is hard for big opportunities to appear anyway. There is one hole for each carrot. Without unclaimed land, there will be no new noble territory. Even if you make achievements, it's just honorary nobility. Sha, the hourglass soon ran out, and the young men participating in the knight squire selection returned to the square one after another, either rejoicing or despondent. It was a mixed bag of emotions. Just as Hudson was about to announce the results, Baron Redman suddenly spoke. A total of 31 people arrived on time. Start the second round. Hudson immediately understood what was going on. There were too many people who passed. Iron Lund Town naturally doesn't lack this population, but he currently lacks an income source. According to tradition, after several months of training, he would have to go out and find his own way. In Hudson's view, the more knight squires who don't want a salary, the better. But Baron Redman didn't think he could afford it. Traditional knights live by war. If they don't have a base, life is naturally hard. But Hudson is different. He doesn't have the burden of noble honor. If he is forced, he can even rob the merchant team. With a sharp sword in hand and a mind full of strategies, how could he starve? His arm can't twist his thigh. He still needs to rely on Baron Redman for his livelihood currently. Hudson reluctantly said, "Next, we'll test the skills. The 10 strongest will be selected." Having said that, he paid no attention to Baron Redman's unhappy face. 10 was his bottom line. It could not be less. More people don't necessarily mean more power, but fewer people will definitely be at a disadvantage. In the era of cold weapons, the more people you have in your team, the better. In the end, Hudson settled on 10 squires. With these 10 youngsters by his side, he felt a little more secure about his uncertain future in this chaotic world. Haven't you eaten? Buck up, all of you. Work hard, sweat more in peacetime, and bleed less in wartime. Why can't you fools understand this? Under the scorching sun, Hudson looked at the group of youngsters dripping with sweat, continuously chastising them. Ever since the completion of the knight squire selection, this scene had become the norm, and everyone was used to it. Knights were born for war, and going to battle was just a matter of time. As squires, they naturally had to keep up. Not only did they need to kill the enemy, but they also had to act as human shields at critical moments. For the sake of his own life, Hudson put in all his effort, applying all the training knowledge in his mind. After 3 months of hard work, the 10 people in front of him were well trained. Even the always stern Baron Redman affirmed Hudson's achievements, saying that he had the potential to be a general. Unfortunately, potential is always just potential. Having been hit hard by society, Hudson didn't think he was that great. No matter how the outside world evaluated him, he never relaxed his training for his subordinates. If you pay attention to your surroundings, you will find that not far away, Baron Redman is watching with his 3 young sons, or perhaps, learning from Hudson. There was no choice. In this isolated world, knowledge was too rare. Especially military knowledge, there was no place to learn from, and you could only slowly explore and summarize. The fragmented notes of the elders were the most precious inheritance of the nobility. The reason why the big nobles could always maintain an advantage was largely due to their monopoly on knowledge. Hudson's seemingly indifferent training methods were priceless in the eyes of Baron Redman. Too embarrassed to ask his son for it, he chose to quietly learn and record it on the side. This was hard on the 3 little guys. At their mischievous age, coupled with the indulgence of the Baroness, they had no idea how valuable the knowledge in front of them was. Baron Redman's efforts were destined to be in vain, especially Leeser, who was staring at Hudson with resentment. If it weren't for Baron Redman's attention not being on him, he he would probably have been treated to a dish of bamboo shoots and meat. After hesitating for a long time, Leaser still couldn't help but say, "Father, I have completed my basic knight training." "What about the life essence?" Before he could finish, the face of Baron Redman suddenly darkened. He glared at him fiercely without saying a word. The more he did this, the more nervous Leaser became. He had paid a heavy price for this life essence. If he couldn't get it, it would be a great loss that he had no choice but to pin his hopes on his two younger brothers to plead for him. Unfortunately, even among brothers in a noble family, competition was inevitable. Family resources were limited. The more you got, the less I got. It was an inevitable fact. Leaser had made a big mistake. If he could be kicked out, it would be beneficial for everyone. They didn't rub salt into the wound. They did that out of brotherly love. After exchanging glances with Leaser, the two little rascals moved their eyes away tacitly. This scene happened to be seen by Baron Redman. However, all this was not enough to move him. The world of nobility was cruel. If you didn't struggle or fight, you couldn't survive in this world where the survival of the fittest was the rule. Knights' virtues: humility, honesty, mercy, bravery, justice, sacrifice, honor, soul. The survival rules of the nobility, however, were self-interest first, hypocrisy, utilitarian, selfishness, rationality, all essential skills. Only after survival is assured will the spirit of nobility be born: honesty, morality, sense of mission. What you can't get is always the best. The more people praise something, the more it is often lacking in real life. Don't be distracted. Watch Hudson's training carefully. It will benefit your future development. Baron Redman said solemnly. After all, they were his own sons. He couldn't be completely cold-hearted. In his view, Leaser was completely putting the cart before the horse. Instead of coveting the life essence that did not belong to him, it would be better to learn more knowledge at this opportunity. In fact, when he first discovered Hudson's talent for training soldiers, Baron Redman also wanted him to train an elite force, but his own purse was not generous, and he simply couldn't afford a standing army. The only armed force in the entire barony was the guard team of less than 50 people in the castle. Since the number of people was small, they naturally paid more attention to individual combat effectiveness. Moreover, guards and armies were not the same thing, and simply copying would only be counterproductive. In a sense, the art of training soldiers was a chicken rib for small nobles. Only by joining the king or the big nobles could they use their skills. Unaware of his father's plan, Hudson was still training his subordinates diligently. In this world with extraordinary power, it is difficult for ordinary people to compete. Even a low-level knight like Hudson could easily defeat more than 10 strong men. This was the fundamental reason why the noble group could always rule the world. Due to the monopoly on resources and the tacit understanding of the noble group, the life essence never flowed out. It was almost impossible for civilians to become knights. The only extraordinary path suitable for ordinary people was to become warriors. Both were extraordinary, but knights of the same realm could completely beat warriors. Not only because of the help of the mount, but mainly because they had awakened the life seed. Although Hudson didn't know what the life seed was, he felt the benefits of awakening the life seed. The most direct feeling was that his overall physical fitness had improved. After each high-intensity training, the life seed would release energy to repair the body's damage. In contrast, warriors had it much worse. Without the help of the life seed, there were many hidden injuries from daily training, let alone going to the battlefield. Long-lived knights were common, but long-lived warriors were few and far between, and they usually didn't live past 50. The short lifespan naturally limited the improvement of strength, and the number of strong warriors on the entire continent could be counted on one hand. As for the mysterious magicians, that was a blind spot in Hudson's knowledge. The few notes in the family books could not explain the problem. Other minor professions were even more needless to say. Ordinary people wouldn't encounter them once in their lives, and Hudson had no way to learn about them. If he was only training knight squires, simple training would be enough. There was no need to work so hard. After all, he had an unsettled heart. Even though he kept telling himself to survive first, his body was honestly working hard to cultivate a base. The first pot of gold in life is always the hardest to get. There are only 10 people available now. Although the number is small, it's better than nothing. In the twilight, an urgent letter shattered the tranquility of the castle. The Skull Society had instigated a rebellion in Dater City, where numerous nobles, including Viscount Alphonse, were slaughtered. The governor of the southeast province, Count Piers, was greatly enraged and ordered the local nobility to suppress the rebellion. The aftermath of information isolation had just erupted. The Skull Society's rebellion had been going on for over a month, yet the Coslow family was completely in the dark. Even with the draft order in hand, Baron Redman was ignorant of the frontline situation and could only passively accept the command. In fact, one didn't need intelligence to know the severity of the situation. If it were a common rebellion, the local lords could have crushed it together, and there would be no need for a provincial draft. A baron's territory was required to draft 500 men. The last time such a hefty mobilization occurred was during the orc invasion 100 years ago, but that was based on prior preparation. The current order, in Hudson's view, was likely due to Count Piers' frustration over the collapsing situation. An army's strength doesn't increase with numbers. A force of 500 untrained peasants would be less effective than the castle's guard, especially given that they were only given 3 days to prepare, was a major flaw. Regardless of anything else, weapons, armor, and food had to be prepared, right? This purely obligatory draft, with no provisions provided by the higher-ups, was bound to breed resentment among the people. The situation is urgent. Hudson, how do you see this draft? Baron Redman asked with a headache. With his 2 older sons absent, he now had to rely on Hudson, who seemed to have some military talent, to make up the numbers. As for the other people in the territory, unfortunately, Baron Redman was a traditional noble and had no habit of discussing with commoners. Father, the situation is still unclear. It is not advisable to commit the family's main force to the war. The draft order only requires an army of 500. Let's just draw 500 strong young men, give them some training, and fulfill this draft order, Hudson advised cautiously. Although their family only had a guard of a few dozen men, that was all Baron Redman had accumulated over several decades. If they were all wiped out, it would take 10 to 8 years to recover. In contrast, a peasant army was cheap. Even if a few hundred men were lost, it wouldn't shake the foundation of their rule. The nobility, war was not entirely a bad thing, at least it could consume surplus population. Dater City is one of the largest cities in the southeast province, and the local nobility is not weak. The fact that they were all wiped out by the rebels means the situation is certainly not simple. It's a pity that I received the news too late. If I had prepared earlier and trained an elite force, perhaps your noble title would have been secured, Baron Redman said regretfully. An opportunity had appeared, but due to lack of preparation, he couldn't seize it, which was obviously a great tragedy. Of course, this was just a sigh. Even if Baron Redman were to gamble, he might not be able to do it. Ultimately, the Koslow family had already put on their shoes. Even if the shoes were not comfortable, it was hard to make up their minds to gamble. Father, there's no need for regret. This world is never short of opportunities, and even if there are none, we can create them. The key is strength. There should be many eyes on this rebellion. If the rebels can grow quickly, there must be someone behind them pushing the waves. With our strength, even if we make great achievements on the battlefield, we can only get 1 or 2 knight territories at most. Count Piers is not a good eater. It's not easy to stand out with him, Hudson scoffed. He hadn't personally killed a pig, but he had seen pigs run. The rebellion had been going on for more than a month, and not only had there been no organized troops to suppress it, but even the news had not been spread. This would not be possible without Count Piers' deliberate indulgence. Innocent people are not guilty, but those who possess a treasure are. The inheritance left by the extinct nobles was clearly eyed by someone. But due to the rules of the game, they couldn't play big fish eat small fish. The Skull Society's rebellion was just a coincidence, providing these guys with an opportunity. Against this backdrop, how could Hudson dare to snatch food from the tiger's mouth? Do you not think highly of Count Piers? Baron Redman asked in confusion. After a few months of association, he had long discovered that Hudson was not a common man. As for his previous mediocrity, he believed that was intentional concealment. After all, Hudson was only the 3rd son of the family. If he showed too much talent, not only would his stepmother be intolerant, but even the eldest son would be displeased. Now that he was about to go out and establish his own household, these issues were no longer problems. It was natural to show his talent to win family resources. I see. I'll consider it further, Baron Redman said hesitantly. Regardless of what kind of person Count Piers is, and regardless of his future, he is currently the big boss of the southeast province. Playing both sides under the eyes of the big boss requires courage. Unless it causes a collective boycott by small and medium nobles, a single protruding beam is likely to rot first. Father, why don't I lead the troops this time? You can stay in the territory in case of any changes. After all, this draft is too urgent, and everyone probably hasn't had time to prepare. As long as we train the peasants a little and form an army that looks decent, we can get through this in the large troops, Hudson proposed confidently. Taking the initiative to vie for the right to lead the troops was a reluctant decision for Hudson. War was imminent. There was no way he could dodge it. Running away at this critical moment would most likely result in him being intercepted halfway and forcibly drafted into the army as cannon fodder. Despite their brief acquaintance, he had a fair understanding of Baron Redman. His political acumen was barely passable, and his military skills were a complete mess. Based on his past battles, Hudson had come to a conclusion. Knight, with good luck, the fact that he had survived until now was due to his considerable strength, and more importantly, his adversaries had always been on the same level as him. They would agree on a time, set up a formation, and then charge with their men. Strategy and tactics were non-existent. He probably doesn't even have these concepts in his dictionary. There's nothing to despise. Everyone plays this way these days. It was all about hard fights, with very few playing tricks. Obviously, this was extremely unfavorable for Hudson. If he went to the battlefield with his father, he would most likely have to charge and fight with real swords and guns. As a rookie knight, Hudson was not ready to fight with others. In his opinion, so-called noble honor was nothing, only life was his own. Even if they had to go to war, they should let the underlings go first. Everyone was a motley crew, As long as they were a bit stronger than the rebels, that was enough. The important task of suppressing the rebellion should still be handed over to the teammates. Just follow the wind in the wind, and if you lose, just run faster than your teammates, brush up your presence among the nobles and mix up your face. If you can take advantage of some military achievements, it would be a blood profit, crisis and opportunity coexist. The risk of wanting to reach the sky in one step and stand out from the crowd is too great. Hudson, who is self-aware, feels that he is still not in control. As it turned out, Hudson was oversimplifying things. If Baron Redman were so easily deceived, he would have been played to death. There are no fools among the noble sons, but these fools, unless they come from a particularly powerful background with someone covering them, usually do not survive 3 episodes. They appear simple and straightforward on the battlefield because of the overall social atmosphere. The environment is such that individuals cannot be unaffected. The final result was that Baron Redman highly praised his performance, and as for his initiative to lead the troops, he neither refused nor agreed. Back in his room, Hudson was already desperate. Words can deceive people, but the body is often very honest. Baron Redman spoke nicely, but the expression between his eyebrows was clearly full of distrust. Thinking about it, a 16-year-old kid suddenly proposed to lead the troops alone. Who, as a parent, could rest assured, moreover, it is to take 500 young and strong to the battlefield. The Costello family is not rich and can't afford such expensive tuition. The key is that this time's enemy is the rebel army that kills the nobles like slaughtering dogs. The game rules between the nobles, they don't know at all, let alone expect the other party to abide by. Late at night, Baron Redman, lying in bed, couldn't fall asleep. Obviously, the conversation just now had a great impact on him. Having mixed in the noble circle for half his life, he knew very well how much darkness was hidden behind this glamorous group. For the sake of interests, there was nothing they couldn't do, but if Hudson's deduction is correct, how should he handle himself now? In the final analysis, the Costello family was too weak. With a large population spread all over the place, it could only deter small and medium nobles of the same level. When they encountered a big noble, it was not enough. Really want to paddle? This seems to violate the knight's spirit. You should know that in past wars, he has never done this. Who in this 100 miles does not know about his bravery? Baron Redman? He didn't want to damage his reputation, but he didn't want to be cannon fodder either. Baron Redman, who was caught between 2 choices, had insomnia that night. The next day, the recruitment information had spread throughout the castle. Whether it was a servant or a guard in the castle, they all joined the discussion. This does not include Leeser. Since he failed to get the life essence, he was not doing well, making the Baroness worry. Leeser, let it go. Your father is also difficult. The impact of this matter is too great. He must show a gesture, otherwise. Before the Baroness could finish her words, Leeser angrily interrupted. Enough, isn't it just to give an account to those bastards? Isn't the previous punishment enough? Must they kill me? We are all members of the Costello family. Why do I have to lower my head, just because I was born late? Not only is the inheritance right forced to be pushed back, but even the resources have to be left behind. This is really too unfair. It's just, the complaint was almost a roar, and the Baroness had heard it countless times. But the rules are just that, and it's not something she can change. Even if she knew that Baron Redman treated her sons equally, and even received more care because of the pillow wind, she was still not reconciled. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't change the order of inheritance. This determined that the family business of the Baron's mansion had nothing to do with her son. Originally she had accepted reality, but seeing Leeser's miserable condition, she once again ignited her unwillingness in her heart. Perhaps it was because of anger, or perhaps because of iron not becoming steel. The Baroness went straight up and slapped Leeser, scolding, "Shut up, Leeser. How many times have I told you that you can't talk nonsense? If your father knew what you just said, you would be swept out now. You are not even a knight now. If you are expelled from the family, you will no longer be a noble. Do you want to be with the commoners outside, struggling at the bottom for a lifetime, without seeing any hope?" She was not reconciled, but the Baroness knew more about the hard-earned status of the nobility. Even if she spoiled her son, she knew that some things couldn't be said randomly. Even if, how much better can my situation be now? He would rather give the life essence to outsiders than to me, his son. Can he still expect to get another one from me next? Even if he has the intention, I'm afraid he doesn't have the ability. That bastard Hudson has been forced to delay for a year, not to mention us. According to the usual practice, after fulfilling the obligations of the Empire, the Baron's mansion can only exchange for a life essence every 10 years. As soon as the words were finished, seeing the Baroness's face changed greatly, Leeser suddenly realized that he had done another stupid thing, that he is not the only seedling of his mother. Besides him, there are 2 younger brothers below, right? Seeing that Hudson is about to go out and make his own way, the next resource competition will be their 3 brothers. Both hands are meat. Can the Baroness unconditionally support him? Seeing the Baroness's face changed greatly, Leeser suddenly realized that he had done another stupid thing, that he is not the only seedling of his mother. Besides him, there are 2 younger brothers below, right? Looking at Hudson about to go out and make his own way, the next resource competition will be their 3 brothers. Both hands are meat, can the Baroness unconditionally support him? Don't worry, this life essence is only temporarily lent out, and will be returned in a few years. Even though life essence is precious, it's not impossible to get. After all, not all nobles have as many offspring as our family, there will always be some extra to flow out. You should rest well, and stop worrying so much. Leave the rest to your father. He will find a way. The Baroness tried to appear calm, however, the slight worry between her eyebrows betrayed her inner unease. Life essence could definitely be procured, as long as one was willing to pay the price, but the timing was uncertain. Nobility also had their own circles. Even if there was life essence flowing out, it was mostly circulated within their own circles. After all, this kind of strategic resource involved not only interests but also personal relationships. Seeing his mother speak like this, Laysol's face turned even more sullen. Return in a few years, but how many few years can one have in life? Considering his age, by the time the life essence returns, his younger brothers would also be of age. For himself, he was likely to be abandoned. Thinking of this, Laysol's hatred for Hudson surged again. In his view, all this was caused by Hudson. If it weren't for Hudson's previous provocation, he wouldn't have stolen the life essence, and naturally wouldn't have ended up in such a disgraceful state. Revenge, I must take revenge. Laysol, who was blinded by hatred, could only think of one thing: to kill Hudson. Unfortunately, it's not that simple to implement this. Direct confrontation was definitely not an option. Even a rookie knight is still a knight, not an opponent for 10 or 8 strong men, let alone him. A little kid.as for poisoning or assassination, that could only be a thought. No one would risk their life for this kind of thing. He guessed that as soon as he revealed this idea, he would be reported by those around him. Even his own mother, the Baroness, wouldn't support it. Once this kind of thing started, it would be endless trouble. Even if she had many grievances, the Baroness didn't want to take the risk. After all, Hudson, the annoying guy, was about to go out and make his own way. Who knows when he might die out there? Wait, mother. Is there going to be a war outside? Laysol, slightly agitated, asked the departing Baroness. The Baroness hesitated for a moment and nodded. From the moment the mobilization order was issued, this was no longer a secret. Baron Redman had been up all night, and she, his wife, was no different. Now she was worried about both her son and husband. War was full of uncertainties. If something happened to Baron Redman on the battlefield, their good days would be over. Although they wouldn't be directly thrown out, a significant drop in status was inevitable. Even if the heir who inherited the family business still respected her for the sake of the noble's face, the future of her sons would be hanging by a thread. Brothers and fathers are completely different concepts. Especially half-brothers, they have to step back even further. Then let father take Hudson with him. He is already a knight, it's time for him to go to the battlefield. The battlefield is unpredictable, and if something happens, no one will find it strange. As long as we bribe a few people, wait for the opportunity to act on him, we can definitely succeed. Laysol said maliciously. This was the only reliable plan he could think of to set up Hudson. After a little thought, the Baroness regretfully shook her head. No, not to mention, the soldiers who can go to war together are all loyal to the Koslow family generation after generation. They are not so easy to bribe. Even if someone was willing to do it, acting under your father's nose would inevitably leave traces. After all, Hudson is now a knight. Ordinary strong men are not his opponents. It's not easy to plot against him. If the snake doesn't die and leaves traces, then there's big trouble. Once your father suspects us, there's no end to it. Once again being rejected, Laysol's heart was bleeding. The plan he had finally thought of was rejected by his own mother, which hurt him deeply. In his view, his mother was completely long hair, short insight. If she were a little more decisive, Hudson and the others would not have grown up. The epic heroes sung by the wandering poets were all persecuted before they slowly grew up. Although he is now playing the villain, the annoying Hudson clearly won't be the protagonist. Laysol was very sure of this. No protagonist would be so mediocre. He doesn't have a fiancée who comes to break off the engagement, nor does he have a childhood experience of eating husks and swallowing vegetables. He doesn't even have an outstanding talent for cultivation. From childhood to adulthood, he has never found any shining points in Hudson. If it weren't for his mother's hesitation, he would have killed this annoying ghost long ago. If he killed those 3 bastards, the Koslow family would be his, Laysol's, and there would be no current embarrassment. As Laysol was self-indulging, the Baroness next to him said thoughtfully, "We are not convenient to take action directly, but Hudson, that brat, in order to compete for favor, volunteered last night to lead the troops to the battlefield alone, but was rejected by your father. Let him go. Mother, at all costs, let him go. The battlefield is unpredictable, anyone can have accidents. If Hudson dies on the battlefield, even if father has suspicions, he can't find out anything." Laysol said excitedly. The more he thought about it, the more feasible it seemed. First, set up and kill Hudson, then apply the same method to assassinate his other 2 elder brothers, and he would be the first in line to inherit. But, Laysol, the battlefield is unpredictable. What if the plan fails and Hudson makes a military exploit? Then it's a loss. The Baroness said with a slight hesitation. Clearly, Baron Redman hadn't revealed the details of the conversation to her and didn't know about Hudson's slacking off plan, otherwise she wouldn't be so tangled. Mother, you overestimate Hudson. Don't listen to father's boasting. He always encourages each son before they leave. It's not true. What abilities does Hudson have that you don't know about? Even if he really has some abilities, he has never had any experience in leading troops. If he can hold his ground on the battlefield and not collapse before the battle, that's already good. To make military exploits is simply a dream. Other nobles are not fools. If there are benefits, they will definitely swarm to grab them. Without father, Hudson definitely can't compete with others. At that time, he won't be able to get any benefits, and he might even become cannon fodder. Laysol analyzed logically, as if at this moment a mysterious force was added to him, making his thoughts extraordinarily clear. In the training field, 500 hastily recruited soldiers were running laps around the camp. There were also 10 youths wielding whips, playing the role of drill sergeants. Be it running too fast or too slow, or not maintaining the formation, all received a lash from the whip, completely draining the soldiers of their spirit. It was evident that the territory's system of subjugation was very effective. The rebellious elements they had imagined were nowhere to be found. After a good deal of contempt for the backward subjugation, Hudson began to enjoy the fruits of it in peace. Given the short time, military training was obviously impossible. What he could do now was to teach them obedience. Even if they were preparing to slack off, they still needed to show some semblance of readiness. Actual combat strength was not important. The key was to look like they had combat strength. Despite his outright denigration of Count Piers in front of his own father, Hudson would not dare to underestimate him when the time came to face him. After all, it would be effortless for such a prominent figure to crush a small fry like him. Hudson, we are leaving in 2 days. Is there enough time for training? Baron Redman said with concern. Despite recognizing his son's talent in training soldiers, he felt that the time was too short. To ensure a timely departure, they couldn't even push the training too hard. In terms of training intensity, it was even less than a university military training. It wasn't that Hudson was being soft-hearted, but mainly because the soldiers' physical fitness couldn't keep up. In this era of backward production, being able to have a nearly full meal with added black bread was already a sign of a lord's good conscience. With the difficulty of filling one's stomach, there was no hope for nutrition. With inadequate nutrition and heavy labor, their bodies naturally wouldn't be in good shape after years of this. This was why every time the Baron's house recruited people, everyone flocked to apply. No matter what kind of work it was, as long as it was with the master, at least they could fill their stomachs. For instance, now, despite the intense training, no one wanted to back out. Going to the battlefield was indeed dangerous, but high risk brought high rewards. It had nothing to do with skyrocketing to the top, but as long as they achieved some military merits, there was a chance to join the guard team. Most of the guards in the Baron's house were born this way. Once they took the step, not only was the problem of food resolved, but they also gained the qualification to practice fighting spirit. Once they became warriors, the treatment was different again. Not only were their food, clothing, shelter, and transportation covered, but they could also receive wages. Don't worry, father. We are not hoping to train an elite force in such a short time. As long as they look combat ready, that's enough. The scale of recruitment is so large that even excluding the areas affected by the rebels, the southeastern provinces can mobilize tens of thousands of troops. With so many forces belonging to different families, it won't be easy to command them smoothly. Most likely, they will be mixed together, and once the fighting starts, who can tell them apart? Hudson said calmly. He showed undisguised contempt for Count Piers' mobilization order, taking his own family as an example. A single charge by the castle guards could easily rout these 500 soldiers in front of him. Mobilizing a large number of troops at once, apart from sounding grand, was essentially asking for trouble. Once actual combat begins, they would find that whether it was logistics, command, or combat power, all would be a sorry sight. Rather than that, it would be better to deploy a small number of elite nobles. Not only would command be convenient, logistics would be ensured, and combat power would be stronger. Hudson did not believe that his family was the only one playing both ends against the middle. Any nobles who sensed something amiss would likely choose to hide their strength. Okay. If that's the case, it's the best. However, you have no combat experience after all. You must be careful and cautious on the battlefield, and don't show off your abilities. These are letters I wrote to some old friends. If you meet them on the battlefield, give them to them. For my sake, they should take care of you. However, you can't rely on this alone. If there is a danger, or if it involves a large interest, these people are all unreliable. If the battle situation is unfavorable, and it does not damage the family's reputation, you should prioritize saving your life. Remember, as long as you live, there's hope. Baron Redman said with a heavy heart, but to Hudson, it was particularly uncomfortable. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Hudson always felt that his father was hinting at him. He could be a deserter at the moment of life and death. Being a deserter is completely inconsistent with the knight spirit. Nobles can be captives, but once they become deserters on the battlefield, they can't mix in the circle. Many nobles would rather die in battle or be captured, rather than be deserters, for the sake of family honor. Of course, it's not completely impossible to operate. Like Hudson, a little-known character, as long as he is smart, even if he becomes a deserter, it is estimated that no one will notice. At worst, he could flee to another country. With the speed of information transmission in this era, the probability of being discovered is not high. Father, have you agreed to let me lead the troops to fight? Hudson asked in surprise. He was ready to be rejected. After all, it was a bit unreliable to let a 16-year-old boy lead the troops. No matter how sufficient the reasons were, they could not change the hard facts of age and experience. Unexpectedly, there was a turn of events. No matter what the reason, Hudson was overjoyed. Saving your life on the battlefield is a priority, this doesn't need to be reminded. As a transmigrator, without the power of a cheat, Hudson dared not take risks. What knight's spirit, noble honor, family reputation, these burdens of traditional nobility, do not exist for him. From the beginning, Hudson was prepared. To sum it up, it was, seek no merit, but seek no fault. Don't get too excited too early, this rebellion is not that simple. If you want to take this opportunity to gain military merits, I can support you, but if you lose your life, you can't blame others. Baron Redman said sternly. It was clear that he had high hopes for Hudson. Everything was determined by the social environment. On the Aslanti continent, for small nobles to progress further, there were only two ways: either you were exceptionally good at fighting, or you were exceptionally good at commanding an army. Compared to the former, the latter had a higher ceiling. After all, it was a world of low magic, and no matter how strong an individual was, they could not compete with a nation. Even the sanctuary had to run fast in the face of thousands of troops. The myth of one against a country only existed in myths. Compared to the unattainable path of becoming a strong person, the latter had countless successful examples. Although the major nobles in the court held high positions, there were also shadows of small and medium nobles. After several generations of operation, small nobles reversed to become major nobles, which was not a novelty. To be precise, it can't be considered a reversal. The noble groups intermarried for generations, and the internal relations were complicated. If they were to trace their bloodlines, they would probably be able to connect them.